Alrighty, so welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be going over the overhead pattern or overhead brake in the Viper and the landing and rollout technique. And due to the nature of the F-16, its main design goal was for it to be light and energy efficient. Therefore, they did not waste weight on a lot of things such as um, good brakes. So with that being said, we will go over a technique called aerobraking, which is where we pitch the aircraft up to have more surface area for the air to go through, which creates more drag, which slows us down more efficiently. So we're going to go ahead and walk through the overhead brake and the rollout technique. I'm going to pause it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to land at this runway right here. So the first thing we're going to do whenever you're trying to approach an airport is, if you can, you're going to see what the runway is. So runway 33. And this is going to be important for the overhead. We're going to need to see the opposite of that, which is 1.5. So whenever we come out and turn 180, we're going to end up heading 1.5. So now we're going to unpause. And so when you find overhead brake, you want to try to get about around 1500 barometric altitude. It doesn't have to be exactly precise, or sorry, radar altitude, 1500 radar altitude. It's not going to be exactly precise because it's radar altitude, not barometric. And so once we have an idea of where 1500 feet is, then we'll see what the equivalent of that is matching up with our barometric altitude. And when you're flying overhead brake in an Air Force aircraft, you will fly over the runway because that's how the Air Force does it, but the Navy will offset to the right, just like they would do for a carrier. And for an overhead brake, we're going to hold about 300 knots. So we're going to descend a little more. So we're going to be holding about 1600 barometric because our radar altitude is around 1500 right now, plus or minus. So we're going to go and get back up to 300. I'm going to hold it at 300. And once we're about over the middle of the runway, we're going to go and brake. So if we were in formation, and we would say one's in the brake. And unlike a carrier brake, we're going to hold the throttle in the same position. And what we're going to do is we're going to control our speed with the amount of G's we pull. So if you look in the top left, I'm controlling my speed, or I'm losing speed by how quickly and how fast I turn. So I'm descending at a pretty good rate. So we're going to roll out at 1.5 because that's the opposite heading. And now we can go and drop back to idle. And as we can see, my wingtip is perfectly under the runway, which is what you want. You want the wingtip to be under the runway, like it is right there. And so now we can go ahead and drop our gear. And right when that bottom fin on the AMRAAM is where or the back of the wingtip, once that's where we want to land, that's when we're going to go and start a turn. So we're not going to fly AOA yet, so it's past where we want to turn, so we're going to go and turn in. And at the same time, we're going to go and pop our speed brakes out. In the 16, you do land with your speed brakes extended, because you need all the drag you can get. So whenever you're turning on final, you're just looking at the runway, cross-checking, and you don't want to fly on speed yet, so you don't want to fly in the bracket. You want to fly just above the bracket, ideally. Remember, it's better to undershoot than overshoot. So it's going to come a little close here. We're going to tighten the turn up a little bit. Get a little slow. Alrighty, so we just overshot just a little bit, or it might be perfect. Yeah, we're about good. So now we're going to place that 2.5 degree line, which is above the 5, on the beginning of the runway. And we're going to drop our throttle to idle to try to drop our speed to fly on speed. So we're going to descend here, and we can also use the poppy lights as well. So we're going to a little bit lower. A little bit lower. Alright, there we go. That's perfect. So now we're just going to manage our on speed. And once we get over the overrun, then we're going to cut our throttle back all the way to idle. And you want to be as slow as you can right about here. Pull back to idle. Bring the nose up to flare. And keep the nose up. And this is aerobraking. So we're going to keep the nose up until we break 100 knots. And then once we hit 100 knots, then we'll drop the nose. I'm going to go ahead and drop the nose. And apply the brakes. and extend the speed brake all the way. And perfect. Now we didn't make this exit, or we probably could if we slowed down enough. Yeah. We're going to go ahead and take this exit and pull the speed brake in. And that is landing the Viper in a nutshell with the overhead brake. Of course, there's a lot more things to go over, like an ILS approach and things like that. But that is the basic principles of landing the Viper as far as the rollout technique and your final technique. And that did go over the overhead brake, so if you want to use that. The good thing about the overhead brake is it can land a lot of aircraft in a quick succession. If we are landing multiple aircraft in that overhead brake, I would brake around this area. The second guy would brake around here, or it's a set time, so not really a set point. And then the first guy would land on the right side of the runway because you have the hot and cold side of the runway. So I'm going to land on the right side. The other guy's going to land on the left to keep out of each other's wake and turbulence. And the third guy will land on the right again, and the fourth guy will land on the left. So you're alternating each side for each plane. So alrighty, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, or if you're in my Discord, feel free to PM me or at me.